Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. Welcome to the Rangers Reviews Monday briefing, morning briefing, on Monday, the 13th of May. We're here to, of course, talk about Rangers' Old Firm defeat on Saturday, the fallout, how they got there, the game in isolation, all of that and more. So do get your comments in. We'll try to get through as many as possible. Joined by a top team to try and help me pick through what happened on Saturday, even though we've probably seen that before. Chris, I'll come to you first. You were watching the game in New Edmondson House for an excellent piece. You've kind of watched that Old Firm game before, haven't you? What did you make of it very briefly, and how was your quieter Sunday?
I've watched that Old Firm game before. I've watched this season before, and I fear I'm about to live a summer that I have lived before. It's another summer of post-mortems where you copy and paste a lot of your points and you change the names. It's another summer of rebuilds and looking at a lot of summer signings. The main thing that has to change, if we're sitting here in 12 months' time, then it's in the same situation has unfolded. Rangers find themselves in a whole heap of trouble. But I think before that, if we get to the October-November window and Rangers find themselves in the same situation as they were in the transition from Beale to Clement, and before that from Gio, and before that, and long before that as well. If Rangers can't break this cycle, it only goes one way, and the club and the support are in for another tough few years. So, but we have made all these points before, and the form book has to change in so many ways.
Yeah, but well, no way to start the podcast on a relevant note like that. We're going to get into the topic of a cycle, how Rangers are here, how they might change it. Johnny, how did you see the game very briefly, firstly? And I'm sure you're in rough agreement with Chris about the diagnosis.
Yes, absolutely, of course. And the game itself for me was kind of similar to what I was expecting. It was quite flat. The reaction, I thought, after the game, because most people predicted that Celtic would win, and they did. I think 2-1, if anything, was a little bit tighter than what people would have previously thought. Looking at the game, though, I think Celtic had a lot of chances. And on another day, the margin for victory could have been greater. Of course, we'll never know what would have happened if John Lundstrom hadn't had his moment of madness, and I feel like that's probably a topic we'll come on to. But realistically, Josh, and this for me has been a big thing throughout this season, and well, even longer than that, certainly. You just always feel like the gap between Rangers and Celtic in terms of just quality is significant enough that if Celtic needed to up their game, they could. They were in, I think, almost total control yesterday until the last 10 minutes where it got a bit scrappy for them. Totally understandable with a title on the line. But you look at that spine, you look at Butland, okay, better than what Celtic have, but then you're in trouble. Then you're talking about Carter Vickers against Goldson. Don't think many Rangers fans would honestly say they think Goldson's the better of those two. I think you're talking about Callum McGregor again, dominating an Old Firm game. To me, that's one of Clement's biggest failures. Just how he thought Tom Lawrence would be able to get close to Callum McGregor, I don't know. He's making the same mistakes over and over again. But McGregor's better than anything Rangers have, we know that. And then up front, clearly, I think most people would agree that Kyogo, while he didn't have his best game yesterday, is more dangerous overall than Cyril Dessers. Probably add Adam Ida into that too, who I think is a good player. It's a really, really obvious situation when one team has got such a stronger spine than the other. And to me, that's just the fundamental problem. Any manager can't fix that. It's a quality issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to get into all of that. We'll try and split the podcast roughly into talking about the game and what went wrong in isolation before we look at the big picture, because it was obviously important to pick out another performance. I think that was lacking quite a lot. Firstly, as Derek normally does, a quick word for our sponsors, MPH Group, who, as you know, have partnered up with Viessmann, renowned for their exceptional German engineering. If you've been thinking about upgrading your boiler, there's never been a better opportunity with their world-class engineering and MPH Boilers award-winning service. All the relevant links for that are in the description. And thank you to MPH, as ever, for supporting this video. Right, let's tackle the game in isolation then, guys. So Clement said after, and again, this was an element of deja vu, that Rangers really only started after 20 minutes. By the time that Celtic had scored, I think their opening goal, they were 12 shots to 3. Feasibly, they could have been 1 goal ahead within, 30, 40 seconds when John Souttar looked to be diverting the ball into his own goal, but Jack Butland made an excellent save. I thought Rangers' off-ball shape, which we'll come into, was confusing. I thought just looking at the lineup before the game, and we spoke about this before the game, just the sheer legs they had in the midfield didn't look enough, and it was always going to be difficult for Rangers to compete on a technical basis, although I'd argue if you had a Campbell and Diomande and Raskin in there, then that would bridge the gap somewhat. But to me, I'll come to you first, Johnny. Rangers not only didn't have the technical ability to match Celtic in there, but they didn't have the legs to match Celtic in there. We are again talking about Rangers having a slow start after an Old Firm. Clement said after that's an area where discussions have to take place, but this was the exact same conversation that was taking place 2 years ago under the time of Giovanni Van Bronckhorst, wasn't it?
Absolutely, and Celtic were a fraction away from scoring within a minute once again, which would have been the ultimate underlining of the many problems that Rangers have in this regard. Listen, they don't have the physicality and power that Celtic do. There's a lot of players, I think, coming towards the fag end of their career. You look at Goldsmith, you look at Tavernier, you look at Lundstrom. These are guys on the slide physically. It comes for us all, and that's not a slant on their professionalism in any way. It's just that once you get past 30, you're not going to have the same dynamism and energy. What you're hoping to replace that with is an understanding of the game and a positional sense that allows you to kind of balance that out. The best players have that. I think you think back to people like Franco Baresi was still incredibly effective into his late 30s because he had that positional sense, didn't really need the pace. But I think one of the first things Clement needs to do, he needs to go and pack this team full of legs and power and running. It's the first thing Walter Smith would do if he came in, and if he was still here and he was able to take over the manager position. We know that that's what he would do. Rangers is a team that requires power and pace and passion, and those are the three things, the 3 Ps that Clement needs to add into this lineup. And I think that needs to be by going out, bringing in a few Scots if he can, people who understand the club, people who understand the league. I think it's important if you want to hit the ground running. We saw last season a lot of players, some good, some who haven't worked out, but didn't get the league, needed time to acclimatise, and we've seen the issues with that, with a slow start. Rangers can't afford to have that. But Josh, to answer your point, they've got O'Reilly, Hatate and McGregor in there. 3 players who have really good ability on the ball, can take it in tight spaces, but they've also all got engines and never stopped going throughout that game. And I feel Rangers just looked a little bit short in that midfield area. Personally, I wanted Dujon Sterling in there. I would have sacrificed him definitely from the right wing to get him into that engine room because he adds that. Personally, again, if it was up to me, I would have put Dujon Sterling on Callum McGregor. I said this on the video on Monday there. I would have just taken the queen off the chessboard, as it were, put your best defensive player on him and said, just follow him around for 90 minutes and whatever you can do when the ball breaks to you, do it. Callum McGregor has been allowed to run these games for too long and it's getting ridiculous. He sets up the first goal. It's a moment where he just leaves Tom Lawrence in his wake. I'd love to hear, Josh, from you, from a tactical point of view, what exactly they were trying to do on McGregor, because it looked like they were trying to switch between Dessers and Lawrence on him. So there was a communication element, which to me just confuses it. And once McGregor gets a run on Lawrence, Lawrence is miles away. He's never getting there. And I just, from a layman, I don't know as much about football as Philippe Clement, but for a layman, I'm watching that, and I know a lot of fans who I've talked to were watching it, a lot of journalists who were watching it, looked at it and said, I don't really understand how they could expect Tom Lawrence to do that job. He's already failed to do that job in one game previously, and he's failing to do it in this game. So,
do you know what goal? Do you know what goal it reminded me of so much was the goal, and this was, as we pointed out last week, the last time that Rangers took the lead in a meaningful Old Firm game. After the weekend, they're waiting for a meaningful big Old Firm win. Now stretches over 2 years and 2 seasons. You remember the goal in Giovanni Van Bronckhorst, under Giovanni Van Bronckhorst, and it was Callum McGregor ran off of Aaron Ramsey.
Yeah,
it was another player in the number 10. It was to make the game 1-1. I think. Correct me if I'm wrong on that day. I think it was Rogic who scored the equaliser after Rangers had taken the lead and put themselves into a good position and nearly went 2-0 up. That is yet another example of similar goals across different managers. And we're going to get into this with what Celtic have benefited from and what Rangers have not benefited from when they've changed managerial, when they've changed, the manager. But this is the point. We've seen these errors and mistakes before under different managers, and that comes on to the football and continuity part, which we'll get into. What were Rangers trying to do in isolation? Well, I think firstly it's important to point out that they did have opportunities and that Clement would turn around and say, if Sterling scores that header, which he should at the very least hit the target, he should do better. Or if Scales doesn't get ahead of Dujon Sterling's header, the other back post moment, then maybe Rangers do get some rewards for their approach. But for me, it was direct. The reason that Lawrence was in there over Cantwell is because if you look at the opportunities and the moments that Cantwell got in the game in December, he slowed the game down and he wasn't incisive. And that is one thing that Lawrence probably is. He's going to shoot from distance. He's going to try a pass over range. He's going to try and launch attacks pretty quickly. But I don't really know what they were trying to do off the ball because we've seen similar approaches before. We saw a similar approach under Michael Beale where it's two players on the centre-backs and the pivot and you're trying to effectively always block the ball into McGregor while keeping the ball with one of the centre-backs and then pressing up in the right moment. But what was confused about Rangers' approach on Saturday is they didn't just trap Scales. At times, it was as if Dessers had a bit of a free role and he didn't have to drop back onto the centre defensive midfielder. Now, Clement said he wasn't happy with the start, so perhaps there wasn't tactical instructions carried out. But what Celtic did quite routinely is that they would just get the ball to McGregor by some other fashion. So it might have been that Lawrence was standing ahead of McGregor and blocking the direct pass from Scales into McGregor, but then Hatate or O'Reilly would drop off, third man pass, get the ball into McGregor, who would go forward. And you're right, Johnny, there was probably 4, 5, 6 occasions where Celtic's midfield broke into space like that, having had the ball against Rangers in a settled defensive shape, while then going on to create opportunities or shots from range. So I don't really know whether it was something that wasn't carried out well, but certainly just on a pure legs basis, the legs were not there. And Chris, to throw it to you, I guess that's what will frustrate people watching this, watching the game, is that we have seen this before with Rangers midfield getting overrun, and we have seen it before with Rangers midfield trying to man mark and being open to Celtic's rotations on either side, all the way back to, again, the time that Giovanni Van Bronckhorst spent at Rangers. What did you make of the game, watching it in New Edmondson House, where I'm sure people were maybe hopeful at the start of proceedings? And I actually thought, watching the game first time, actually Rangers are doing okay here, but then watching it back yesterday, as I say, Celtic had 12 shots to Rangers 2 or 3 within the opening 20-30 minutes, and it felt like when O'Reilly scored that goal again, with a similar goal to one we've seen before, it really felt like that had been coming, didn't it?
Yeah, we spoke on the video pre-match, and you had the piece last week about the importance of scoring first in Old Firm games. I think Ian Crocker had a stat about it. I can't remember off the top of my head what it was, but the stats of teams that score first and then don't lose Old Firm games, it's huge. And Rangers, when they had their chances, like those ones that you outlined there, certainly the Silva one, you have to take them. Big games, big moments. You need players to take those moments. When those chances don't go in, and you look at the flow, the Celtic be able to break through Rangers too easily, the chances that O'Reilly had, the chances that McGregor had, I think even, I say, watching it in Edmiston House, there was an optimism, I think, before it, but a realism as well. And as soon as it started, and you get a feel, and certainly watching Rangers this season, you get a feel how games are going to unfold. And I think it became quite evident early on that Rangers were really going to struggle. When you don't take your chances, you allow Celtic that freedom to play. You see them. There was a sense that the first goal was coming, and even when Dessers scored, there was no real. The penalty save from Jack Butland in the second half got a bigger roar and got a bigger outpouring of emotion, if you like, than the Dessers goal, because even when Dessers gets it and Rangers respond, in adversity quite well. I have to give him a wee bit of credit for.
Mhm.
There was no real feeling of, right, that's it, we can go and kick on and we'll go and win the game, because you knew that Celtic still had gears to go through. And as Johnny said earlier on, 2-1 flattered Rangers in the end. If Celtic had won 4 or 5 or 6, I don't think it would have been that flattering to them in terms of what they put into the game and the chances they had and how much they dominated it at spells. And that would have been really, really difficult for the manager. And like he's come under a bit of pressure after it. People are now asking questions of him. If you go and lose by that margin in an Old Firm game, it puts a very, very different slant on it. So I think he should be relieved that it was only 2. But overall, so Rangers didn't do enough to win, didn't deserve to win, and never, for me, they never looked like winning. And that goes back to, again, as we've just discussed there, and as we said on the pre-match show, it comes back to the selection and more specifically the tactics. Now, we spoke about it in the morning of the shape has to change. Rangers need to do something different. How many times have we used the old line about keep doing the same things and you get the same outcomes? You're banging your head off a brick wall watching Rangers in these games. And I know we'll come on to the Hampden game later on. That's what makes the Hampden game so important for the manager. If he goes with the same players and the same setup and Rangers lose the game in the same manner, people will then start asking really big questions of Clement, and that's the situation that he's put himself in. The Ibrox game, you can put it down to individual mistakes like Goldson for the handball, like Tav for the first one. He could almost, if he really wanted to, he could shift most of the blame onto the players. I think a lot more of the blame has to go on the manager. That's not to say players are blameless, because very, very few of them played well at the weekend. Sterling, obviously excellent in whatever role you put him in. Jack Butland, hugely important once again. Apart from that, there was nobody really at it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let's get some comments. There's a lot of comments coming in, so forgive me if I don't get to yours. John Taylor says, Clement believing that midfield was the best for that game is the biggest worry for me. Gaz Jones, poor recruitment over the last 5 years came back to bite us on Saturday. Michael says, Chris said it perfectly. Same old, same old. I think we have a good manager in Clement. However, he must get rid of the old guard in the summer. Ali Quinn saying Silva should score that header. And Ali agreeing with you, Johnny. Why doesn't Clement see Sterling in the middle? Let's talk about the midfield. I tweeted out at one point in the game that I feel like Sterling is a player that Rangers should build around rather than fit in. And it is partly circumstantial because, look, Clement didn't have Cortez, Danilo and Sima, and that, in my opinion, would be his first choice front three, and it would be a different game, even just in isolation on Saturday, if you had these three players. But what Chris says there about Lundstrom, Johnny, and I'll get your thoughts on Lundstrom and Lawrence starting in the first place when the midfield in the first half at Ibrox only just a month ago in that 3-3 draw, I think looked so far off Celtic's midfield three and what they were trying to do. Clement is clearly a loyal manager, and you could see that in his comments about Lundstrom after the game. But loyalty needs to come out, I think, in the right moments. And when it appears that a player is leaving in the summer, I think you can still be respectful for them while, as Chris says, making the right decision for the cup final. And the right decision has to be a Sterling or a Raskin or both in the middle of the pitch. What needs to change in there for Rangers over these next 3 games? Because I'm sure you'd be in agreement that Lundstrom has, I think, now run his course at Rangers. That was a real moment of madness for him after not only putting Rangers behind with you got caught an unfortunate own goal because I don't really know what he was trying to do, but then to go and sell the jersey, so to speak, by getting a red card at that area in the pitch made it so difficult for Rangers, Johnny, because the one area where they are normally better than Celtic is the end of games. And you've seen that in the last 2 times they've went to Parkhead. It's been 2-1. The home crowd has been nervy. They've had some moments, but they've been forced to chase the game with 10 men as opposed to 11.
Yeah, for me, thing number 1 has to be bringing in Nico Raskin back into the fulcrum of this midfield. John Lundstrom's not going to be there for the next 2 games. And for me, shouldn't be in the starting lineup against Celtic. He's too many times he's got it wrong. And if you really want to burn your bridges with the Rangers support, then Philip Clement would put him back in the lineup. So I would heavily advise him against doing that. As Chris says, it's that thing about doing the same things all the time and then expecting a different result each time. So Nico Raskin for me has to come in. I thought he was very bright when he came on. Yeah. Josh, we've always talked about him being a ball carrier. I think just technically he's on a different level. and he's actually a football player. So I'd like to see him alongside Diamande rather than Lundstram, and I think they've got to start with that. Nico Raskin at 23 is the future of Rangers, or should be one of the future players for Rangers, one of the ones that they can build something around. So let's start that process as of midweek and get him in there. I think Rangers need to really think about this number 10 position. I don't think it works with Cantwell, and I don't think it works with Lawrence. I think both are good players in different ways and can offer things against certain teams in the league. But against Celtic, for me, both of them have... Well, Cantwell's flattered to deceive, and Lawrence has provided nothing. I give Lawrence a bit of a pass. I know that'll probably frustrate a few people because I've seen a lot of criticism of him. But I think Tom Lawrence has been basically out for a year and a half, or even more than that, a year and 3 quarters, and is still just building himself back up to where he needs to be. I think you won't really see the best of Tom Lawrence until he's had a pre-season, and then you can make a more solid judgment on him. But it's clear to me that number 10 role needs to be sort of pulled back or changed. I don't know if it needs to be Diamande in there with a stronger base in behind. I don't know how they do it with the personnel, to be honest. It's going to be difficult, Josh. There's not an awful lot of options. But I don't think you can go against Celtic once again playing this way. It just doesn't work. It's too easy for them. You saw again, they invert the fullbacks and just completely overload that midfield. 68% in terms of passing completion in the game. Celtic was 18 points higher. 68%, that's never good enough to win a game.
Not very much, is it?
No, I mean, really, really, really poor. And I know Rangers were more direct. They were bypassing the midfield. When you're direct, the accuracy goes down. I know all that, but geez, you need to use the ball better than that. There needs to be times when you're holding on to the ball. I don't mind Rangers being a long ball team. I don't mind that. If they're physical, if they're aggressive, in some ways in Scottish football, of course it's a bit anachronistic. Of course it's going to have young Josh tearing his hair out. But it's fine if it's effective. But what we're seeing is not effective. Cyril Dessers, and I've been really critical of him, I would just say he's not a guy who's going to hold the ball up. That's not his game. He's trying to get in behind. He's a movement striker. He's a presser. And I thought he was fine against Celtic. He took his goal well. I wouldn't give him massive amounts of criticism. He didn't win an awful lot of duels, but I think partially that's because of the kind of duels that he was placed in. It's not really his game. So if Rangers are going to be a long ball team, you need to have strikers that can deal with the ball better. You know, for example, I think you could play a long ball to Adam Ida at Celtic, someone like that, a big strong lad who can hold the ball up, take it down, lay it off. But Rangers don't have strikers like that, so it's a bit strange that they've kind of moved towards this fractured style of play that's seen them shell balls in. I think Clement would be well advised to get back to what they were doing when they first started, get Raskin into that midfield, and as I say, try to shore it up a little bit. I think the way to play your Celtic is with a 3-5-2. I've been saying it for a long time. I think that puts them in trouble. It gives you more, gives you a lot more strength in that midfield, makes more of a battle of it, and gives you two options up front rather than having one striker isolated up there, especially if you've got a bit of pace up top. But it comes back to, and again, this for me is why I would say Philippe Clement deserves a little bit more time. Well, a lot more time, to be honest, a lot more time, but he deserves a little bit more understanding. Really, there just isn't that many options. We can talk about that midfield, say, yeah, Lundstram should have been in there, Raskin should have been in there. The problems are way bigger and way deeper than one or two slight adjustments. I totally agree with these criticisms, and I'm not saying it's beyond criticism, but Josh, your point about Cortez, Sima and Danilo is right. I mean, Rangers spent £6 million on a striker in the summer, a striker to take them to the next level. And he's appeared in 12 league games. I think it's something like 600 minutes. I mean, that is absolutely brutal when a club like Rangers spend that kind of money and you get that kind of return. You're never going to be able to recover for that because that's the guy that's supposed to take you to the next level. Then you get a loan signing like Sima, who turns out to be so good, and then just at the height of his form, when he looks like he's going to really kick on, it's another major injury suffered on international duty that basically takes him out the whole run in. He comes back and then he's injured again. Mm-hmm. You know, and you saw the impact he had against Celtic in that 45 minutes.
And Cortez, Johnny, who was signed to replace him in the short term, but then also give you the option of playing both together when he was back, and Ridvan being out on international duty again when he'd been Rangers' best player of the year beforehand. And
I agree with all this, Josh, but there'll be fans listening to this and going, enough of the excuses, because it was last year and it was the year before, and they're right in that regard that there is a fundamental problem with Rangers and injuries.
Yes,
now,
totally.
I'd love someone to ask Philip Clement today at the presser, like, can you outline what is being done? Because
he was asked
the amount of money that must have been wasted. I think, Chris, you'll be able to remember maybe the figure that we were given. There was a sort of there was a briefing and with a number of the press at the start of the season, and there was a sort of briefing that was given, I think, about the amount of money that was coming out. Am I right in saying that in terms of injuries last season, how much was sitting in the stand? Was it 26 million or something like that in wages?
Can't remember the figure off my top of my head, but I remember when we were told we all going to recoil. That's a lot, and it's a problem that has to be addressed. But you can't lose. Rangers can't lose that amount of quality from a squad and still expect to go on and win things. But they came so close to doing so, and that's why I think the manager does have credit in the bank, because this squad, it's not good enough collectively, individually. It's not good enough. It should have been nowhere near being just a couple of games away from winning a treble. The fact that the manager is able to get it into that position, I think that gives him enough credit in the bank to say he deserves backing in the summer. He deserves a chance to go and build his own squad, deserves a chance to go and bring in his own players. But the conversation, of course, then shifts to, well, is the recruitment been good enough? Is the work that Clement and Niels Copping going to do be that much better than what Michael Beale did last summer, what Gio and Ross Wilson did before that? Simple answer is it has to be. Rangers cannot keep having the strike rate that they have had over the last couple of seasons. This summer, I think, almost feels like the first summer under Steven Gerrard. Think back to 2018, had to rebuild the core of a squad with. Also, McGregor was there. You had Steve Davis, that also came in slightly after that, but you had Arfield, you had Connor Goldson. Rangers need stalwarts. They need to build a core of a squad that can then be added to in successive transfer windows. That's not there anymore. The spine of the team needs completely rebuilt. I think they will have to go and sign a new goalkeeper, unfortunately, because selling the goalkeeper will help fund a lot of this work. There's a lot of work that needs done, but I think Rangers need to get back to a core of players who are one of the required quality as they were during that Gerrard summer, but also that are robust enough. They need more guys that can churn out the games, and not churn in a bad way in terms of putting in 5 out of 10 performances. They need guys like Tav has been over the last few seasons, like Goldson has been for so much of his Rangers career. We need guys that you can just rely on to turn up in training, to set the standard, to turn up in a match day, and to win games. And they need a bigger core of those type of players.
Josh, just on the turnover, I think the good news is trying to find a positive amid all this. The good news is I think there will be a good amount of money to spend in the summer, because Lammers is going to go. You look at what he's doing in the Eredivisie, I don't think he'll be short of takers. There will be people that will come in and take him back for the money, at least, that Rangers paid. I think if you want to sell Dessers on, you look at the season that he's had. If you do admit, or if you do say, look, it's not worked out overall, I don't think you'll struggle to get back near what you paid for him, given the season that he's had in terms of numbers. You look at the opportunities potentially that might be there with Butland. Now, I don't think any Rangers fan wants to let go of Butland, but I do feel that the play with Butland at Rangers was always going to be about bringing him in for a season or two, getting him back as established as a first-team keeper after a few years where he wasn't, and selling him back down to the Premier League, and it being a really good turnaround transfer. You would hope that would be another season down the line, not this season, but it may be that to fund it, that Butland is the one that is being looked at as the key asset, and it would be big money to price him away, given he's got a 4-year contract. You factor in Butland, you factor in Seema, you factor in Dessers, you factor in Lammers. That's already a fair amount of money coming in. Whatever money has been made available by the board gets added to that. Then you've got the wages. Barisic is not on a small salary. Lundstrom is on an extremely large salary. There's a potential for Saudi moves, potentially for Goldson and Tavernier. We don't know where that is at, but we know Steven Gerrard was talking last night. There are going to be major transfer moves made by Al Ettifaq in the summer. So you wonder about that one. Could that be more money coming in from that? Listen, every penny will be needed. But I do think there's options there in terms of reshaping this squad to bring the money back in and allow it to be remolded in Clement's image.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about how more generally how Rangers are here and how they get out of here. Then we've addressed the game. I think we're all in agreement that Clement needs to. He's had his hands tied in some regards with injuries, but I agree. You also had the opportunity to play a more progressive, forward-thinking midfield at Celtic Park, and that needs to be the case at Hampden. We've seen that type of performance against Celtic before. It just doesn't work. It invited way too much pressure. But Chris, let's talk about how Rangers got here. I had a piece out yesterday, and I'm going to highlight this comment from Gaz again, which says poor recruitment over the last 5 years. It was effectively the issue on Saturday. I totally agree with that, and it's something that we've spoken about for a long time. Squad contingency planning and who is overseeing this, who is above the manager, the one who plans a squad from season to season and make sure that what has happened does not happen. That's why you've seen Niels Koppen come into the club. And in fairness, I think January recruitment and what we know about summer recruitment, it looks as though Rangers are heading in a new direction. And quite simply, they have to. John Bennett was very vocal at the most recent AGM in his criticism of recruitment over the past few years and the need to go and fix that and not make it a sporadic wins. But Rangers are here because of what also they did last summer and the mistakes they did make last summer. And it's important to recognise that although they're going somewhere different, they had a transfer window last season that was very much built in a manager's image and was very much built to a specific style of play image, which is why you've got no wingers for your manager that you then appoint in October. I think Rangers are here. You look at the game at the weekend and you've got Leon King, who can't get off the bench, who is a centre-back. That means that Dujon Sterling can't play higher. He was not quite a first choice under Van Bronckhorst, but looked as if that was his position there. He was going to be the third or fourth pick. He had a long-term contract. Now he can't get in. This time last year, I remember the game at Hampden, the League Cup final. Nico Raskin and Todd Cantwell immediately provided an upgrade on, at the time, John Lundstrom and Glenn Kamara in the middle of the park for Rangers. It's a year on, and that lesson has not been learned. Loads and loads more issues, whether it be Michael Beale's team last season, who were pretty good in a couple of Old Firm games, but didn't have the talent up front, whether it be Sakala missing those open goals or Morelos and Kent way past their best, having been able to run down their contract, not being able to get them over the line. For me, the reason that Rangers are here is because of short-termism. They've appointed 4 different managers, or 3 managers since Steven Gerrard, 4 different managers in the last 3 to 4 years. And the style has went from Steven Gerrard's high and wide fullbacks, narrow attacking players, the whole squad kind of conditioned around that, to then go into Giovanni Van Bronckhorst wanting to play with wingers and not having the players to do that, having to play Scott Arfield out there for a lot of that season. Then you go back to Michael Beale, who still has the core of that team, and he is the figure of football and continuity, if you will, between Ross Wilson leaving the club and Clement coming in. But his style changes totally again to play with no wingers, and the recruitment is shaped in that image. And then you have Clement come in, who wants to play a totally different style of football. If you compare that to Celtic over the last 3 seasons, yes, they've had change in the dugout, but how much, especially in these games, in the games that matter, in the big moments, how much has their style changed in Old Firm games? Not that much at all. And they've had the recruitment issues, but I think what has got them over the line is not only more quality, but it is the fact that they are still putting, square pegs and square holes. Does that make sense? Not round pegs and whatever. You know what I'm trying to say? It fits with the overall style. First time. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it fits with the overall style of what they're trying to do. The reason that we have seen this movie before is because these mistakes have been made before. And the only reason Rangers will not make these mistakes is if they have continuity beyond the manager, which they've not had since Gerrard left, and if that informs their recruitment policy. Because otherwise you get a squad which Clement has had to work with and hasn't helped himself sometimes, and the Raskin situation comes into that. Clement has had to work with so far, which is inbounds for his style of play, and then doesn't get you over the line in the big moments. The only way, in my opinion, I'll put it to you, the only way Rangers get out of that is by having a long-term footballing plan, because otherwise, as you said at the start of the show, we're going to be having this exact same conversation this time next year.
We are, and we've had this conversation too often in the last few seasons, but as you say there, Josh, it comes down to recruitment. Recruitment in football is everything. If you don't have the right players, it doesn't matter how good a coach you are, how good your PowerPoint presentations are. Johnny mentioned quality earlier on. Celtic still have, in those key areas outside Jack Butland, Celtic still have better quality. And they went through a number of seasons where they were able to buy at a certain level, win successfully in Scotland, and then sell at a certain level. And that's something that, for all the talk of this being the fourth pillar and the player trading model, Rangers' player trading model doesn't really exist. It's never really got going. There has been wins in there, I think sporadic wins, as John Bennett called them. So you bring an academy player through like Nathan Patterson, great, but where's the next one? Ross McCausland's not going to go for that type of fee. Leon King isn't going to go for that type of fee, and there's no one else that's chaperoning the door, so you don't have a next Nathan Patterson. You look at Aribo, look at Bassey, where's the next guy who's going to go and score a goal in a European final like Joe Aribo? No one in the squad of that quality. Hasn't been replaced. Look at Calvin Bassey in terms of that profile. Where's the next one? There's not one. That you don't have a potential £20 million asset that you've picked up from an academy. Now, Sterling could get to that level. Sterling could be the next one, but isn't there yet. So there's a huge amount of pressure on Niels Coppin and the manager. If the board believe that these guys, that Coppin and Clement, are the people that will deliver the next title and the one after that, and will deliver sustained success, not just a case of we win one and then everything's rosy. I've made that mistake after 55. If they truly believe that these are the right guys to go and deliver that sustained success, then they have to be backed, and have to be backed properly. We had a piece not long after Niels Coppin was appointed, kind of going through the process of why he was the man that Rangers wanted, why they believed that he was the key man, and also a lot of that work, or a lot of those reasons, came down to the work that he did with PSV. So you look at players like Basagli, Walter Benitez, I was on that list. Sangari was a big one. Joey Viessmann was a big one. Xavi Simons was a big one. And you look at players at that level, when they first went in, they were rated, but still had a lot to prove. You then go on and you're successful with them. And we need to see Rangers, I think, go into different markets. They need to try different things. If with a stream of English Championship players over the course of the summer, I might not even bother renewing my press pass for next season. We can't keep going down signing English Championship players, because they're not at the. You can't turn a Championship player into a Champions League player. Yes, you might get the odd one, but there's been too many of these kind of failures over the last few seasons. I think one of the things, speaking to people for that Coppin piece, it's interesting that Rangers are looking to get into different markets. So we've seen links to South America. We've seen links to Central America. We also had the story on the defender Cordoba last week. I would like to see them go into Scandinavia, try and pick up the best young players in Belgium and Holland. The manager in Coppin must know that market well. It's not a case of, well, you just sign what's on your doorstep in terms of English players. Johnny mentioned it earlier on in terms of Scottish players. It's a market that Rangers haven't shopped in well enough over the last few seasons. Now, the standout ones are obviously you've like Lewis Ferguson and Josh Doig. They're gone, and you'll never be able to get them back now at the finance, unfortunately. But you look at David Watson, you look at Leonard Miller, Connor Barron has been mentioned. You need to pick up the best of what's on your doorstep, and then be smart in your recruitment. And being smart is not just a case of who's done well in the Championship. We'll just go and get them. I'd like to see Rangers go into different markets. Celtic have reaped the rewards of that. Who knew that there were potential players in Japan, for example, apart from Ange Postecoglou? That was never a market that Celtic and Rangers were going to look at. Ange knew it, and you then look at the huge success that Celtic have had under under Ange, and that has now continued into Brendan Rodgers, because ultimately these guys are good players. The more good players you have, the more chance you have of being successful.
Johnny, to put it to you as well, I mean, as Chris says, and as we've reported, January does reflect that. A player like Mohamed Diamande, I think he'll thrive when he's in a better functioning team that suits his style of play. At the moment, when the ball is bypassed in the midfield a lot in these games, I don't think it gives him much of an opportunity to play his game. But the likes of him and Cortez, we've just spoken about Raskin last January, came in for a relatively low fee. That fits the model of what Chris is talking about. The issue is Rangers haven't had a summer like that yet, because if you look back, it was only this time last year that Michael Beale was, and there's been some wins from last summer, not least through John Sterling and Jack Butland. But Michael Beale was saying this time last year roughly that every player signed in the January window would be traceable to him in some format, would be traceable to his football journey in some format. So the fact is that, okay, Rangers might be moving to this model, but they have not yet totally moved, and they are still kind of, I guess, paying for what they did last summer, and the fact that they had to then go and change a manager in October as a result of that. But how do you see the recruitment focus? Because what Chris says for me is totally right. The only way that Rangers are going to get out of this is not only with recruitment, but recruitment that is aligned over a number of years, so that you don't get a Nico Raskin who is the centre of your midfield one year, then is totally out of the picture the next.
Yeah, 100%. I think on the whole Scottish talent, I couldn't agree more with Chris with what he's saying there. I think you need to look at those boys he's mentioned. I think it's important that Rangers have some semblance of Scottish identity, and I think that feels a little bit like it's been almost slightly lost with the departure of Stephen Davis, Scott Arfield. I know Davis is obviously from Northern Ireland, but he understands the club and the culture of the club going back into its history. I think we need more of those guys. With Ryan Jack going out the door, I think almost certainly in the summer. What's left in that squad in terms of experienced Scottish professionals that can really get across the history and what it means to the other guys in the dressing rooms? You know, Tavernier and Goldson have been around for a long time, and if they are still remaining, then people will say that they can do that. But you look at Celtic, and they've got quite a few of the guys there in that squad that are still been there, done it, and know the script. You know, people like Callum McGregor, obviously, Tony Ralston. Then you've got James Forrest coming back into things. You know, giving them that bedrock of Scottish guys who can help the others in the dressing room. I would like to see Rangers go out and sign 2 players, and I think it can be easily funded if you sell Lammers and Dessers, and that would be Miovski and Shankland. And I would go in and get the 2 of them, and then you have Miovski, Shankland and Danilo, and starting next season, there is no question on anyone's mind if Rangers have the firepower to win the league. Everyone knows they have the firepower to win the league. For years, Rangers have not scored enough goals. For years. Alfredo Morelos never scored more than 18 Premiership goals. This is the key core problem that Rangers have and that Rangers face. Until they solve it, they will be also-rans. They must go out and sign strikers who can score goals domestically, guaranteed. There are 2 strikers there, and Shankland and Miovski, that you can get in. They will be expensive, but I think the majority of the cost would be picked up by selling the 2 players I've mentioned. If you add Yanis Hadji in it would pay for the whole thing. So I really, really, really hope that the club are keeping a close eye on these 2. Now, Aberdeen might ask for £7 million for Miovski. At his age, I'd pay that. That's my take on it. I think you've got to go and get a guy that has shown the quality he has, that is a guaranteed performer. Rangers paid £6 million on Danilo, who's not a guaranteed performer, because you don't know how he's going to adapt to Scottish football. You know how Miovski's going to adapt, because you've seen how he's performed at Aberdeen. So those 2 things, for me, are just obvious, straightforward things that the manager should go after. Now, Josh, I'll let you come in and shoot that down.
No, I'm not going to shoot it down entirely. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen, and I don't know if it is that simple. But yeah, I mean, I agree with part of your point that having a guarantee of goals is important. I think that Dessers has at times been undervalued. I agree that he wouldn't be my starting striker if I was in charge of Rangers recruitment policy going into next season. I also think his numbers have been overlooked at points. But listen, there's so much work to be done to that Rangers squad. My focus would not so much be on... my focus would always be on quality. And I think if you get someone like a Diomande, and I know he's not totally solved every issue Rangers have, but people can see is going to be a really good player. I think quality needs to be at the forefront of what Rangers do with a core of players through it. For me, the main focus is what is the spine of your squad next season, building around players like Dujon, Sterling, Ridvan Yilmaz has the injury question. But players like him, Diomande, I think Cortez is someone that we don't know exactly how that deal is going to unfold and whether it's going to be permanent in the first instance or not. But he, I think, demonstrated enough in 4 or 5 games to show that he can make an immediate impact. I mean, Chris, as we come to close, and we should remind people, got a lot of people on that they can subscribe to the website at the moment. £4 for 4 months, best way to support our work and keep the morning briefings going. And of course, read all of the excellent writing on the website. Where do you stand on Johnny's take there? And I guess just taking it back to the next 3 games as well to close. Rangers still have the opportunity to end the season on a high, and it'll feel like a long way away for people watching this today. But if they're to win the Scottish Cup final in a couple of weeks, then the narrative will be totally different. The point is, it's going to take a lot to win that game. And I think it's going to take a lot of changes, and a lot of changes from what we've seen over Old Firms in the last couple of years, because Rangers haven't won a big game since that game at Hampden against Celtic well over 2 years ago. I put it to you, what would you like to see change in the kind of starting 11 up until that game in a couple of weeks' time against Celtic?
I think if you focus solely on that Celtic game, if Sima is back, that also makes a huge difference. And if Sima is available and perhaps Matondo is available, I think that allows the manager to stick with. I don't think he should, but I think he will then be able to stick with this plan that he's got now, this tactical setup that we have seen that he favours and that he wants to play with. If he doesn't have wingers available, he should go back to the drawing board. Don't play Sterling wide right. Don't play Silva wide left. Change it up. Have a midfield 3: Diomande, Raskin, and Sterling. I would have John Lundstrom nowhere near it. I think John Lundstrom has kicked his last ball for Rangers. In fact, the last thing that John Lundstrom will kick in a Rangers jersey is Alistair Johnson. I wouldn't have him anywhere near it again. So for me, that's the midfield 3. If Sima is fit, I think that probably changes it. And if he does have that wide option, I think we'll see him go with what's there. Also Tuesday night, really interesting to see the reaction from the Ibrox fans. Is it anger? Is it apathy? Is it a mix of both? Also, Tynecastle on Saturday. It's 90 minutes just to round off another disappointing season. Thankfully, they do still have the Scottish Cup. They do still have a chance to take something from this campaign. But big questions for the manager heading into it. And as soon as the final whistle blows, regardless of the outcome, it's full focus on what are we doing next season, who's coming in, really importantly, who's going. We'll get answers on the contract players. I'm sure we're all in agreement that we wouldn't keep any of them, and happy for all them to move on. A number of players who are under contract, I think they have. There's a big calls to be made on a number of them as well. And so there's so much riding on the first few weeks of the summer. There's a huge focus on Germany and European Championships, and that's where the football world will focus. But all Rangers' focus has to be at Ibrox, because there's just so much work has to be done in the first few weeks heading into pre-season, and then hopefully when that squad is back for that pre-season trip, and heading into the first qualifiers, heading into the first few games, hopefully there's a squad there that looks in better shape. Because to go right back to the start, if we end up back in this cycle, we know where we'll be come October, November, and we know where we'll be this time in 12 months.
Yeah, doing a lengthy podcast on a Monday. We'll end with this. James Strachan donates to the channel. Thank you, James. He says, Johnny, I want you as a recruitment officer. So you've struck a tone with those comments, Johnny. You'll be glad to know. We're going to leave it there. A reminder, folks, if you want more of the Rangers review, you can either join our YouTube channel for extra videos every single week, or subscribe to the Rangers Review website, where you'll get top quality Rangers coverage every day. It's the best way to keep up with us and support us if you do watch us every single morning. We'll have lots of coverage from the press conference later today, and of course when Rangers return to action tomorrow against Dundee, if you can stomach it. But until then, thanks for watching. Have as good a Monday, I should say, as you can, and we'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.